Hello, welcome to the Blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. My name is Connor, and today I thought we would talk about work and employment and unemployment as it refers to somebody who can't see, somebody who's vision impaired, especially because today is International Day of People with a Disability, and the job situation is kind of a big deal. I don't particularly like tokenized days of appreciation or awareness, but yeah, I guess this is kind of a big topic and it really has a lot to do with how things improve in the future, at least how I see it anyway. So I thought it would be good to explore some of, I guess, what happens when you're looking for work and just everything involved in that process. Usual disclaimer, just my thoughts and opinions, particularly on this one because everybody has different experiences of looking for work or things they've been through, and not every country or city or whatever is the same, so keep that in mind. Okay, so when it comes to working when you're blind or low vision or vision impaired, there's a kind of a scary statistic that is basically roughly 70% of people who are blind or vision impaired in the Western world are unemployed. And of the 30%, I would say a large amount are probably underemployed. Now, these statistics are from the European Blind Union, which have about 70%. Vision Australia here in Australia has about 69% unemployment. And it's fairly similar around that kind of high 60s, 70% margin in Canada and New Zealand and the United States. Obviously, that says nothing about other parts of the world that I guess may have different levels of accessibility. So I have nothing to say about them. I don't want to make shit up, basically. But in terms of the Western world, those are the statistics, and they're pretty shocking. So, with that in mind, I thought it would be good to start in the beginning of trying to find work. And I think for me, a big part of the work debate when it comes to being blind or having a disability comes down to two things: what others think we can do and what we think we can do. So, unfortunately, what happens is if there's low awareness in the community, there's a tendency for people to have low expectations and to maybe have the wrong idea about what somebody with a disability can or can't do. And that might be based on truth and it might be based on assumptions. And that can be the difference between you getting a shot and you not getting a chance at all. The other side of it is what somebody with a disability thinks they can do. Now, in my own example, I grew up in a situation where I wasn't really exposed to what I might be able to do. I had quite low expectations of myself, but other people around me also had low expectations of me because it was kind of implied that, well, can't expect too much because of the situation. And in one hand, that's maybe useful because you're not putting extra pressure on. But on the other hand, it's kind of implying and giving you this idea that there's no point in striving for anything because it's all out of reach. And especially when you're younger and you're impressionable, if you have people who are older saying, look, there's probably not a lot you can do, so just enjoy yourself, you take that as gospel because when you're younger, you think, well, these people know better than I do. And some of them are in the field of disability or are in position of authority. So you tend to think, well, they must know what the story is, so sort of things are a bit doomed. This can probably be summed up by work experience. So in high school, when I got to year 10, everybody had to do 10 weeks of work experience to, start getting us ready. And while everybody else had work experience either arranged or help to arrange it, and, the school was involved in that, I wasn't. Nobody arranged anything for me. It was kind of put in the too hard basket. And so I didn't have anything. And it wasn't until at the end of the 10 weeks, or even after everybody else had done theirs, just before the end of the school year, that somebody said, well, hang on, what about Connor? And so I managed to get 2 days work experience, whereas everybody else got the equivalent of 10 weeks. And I know it was only a couple of hours across 10 weeks, but that was sort of the perfect encapsulation of, I guess, the afterthought or the lack of expectations or whatever that was involved. Similarly, when I got to the end of university, I started going to career advice and trying to work out how I would transition out of university into the workforce. And, I would go into these career sessions, and the person on the other side, who was supposed to be the knowledgeable partner in all of this, would say, well, what can you do? What kind of job could you do? Or how are you going to work? Or something like that. And when you're in a position where you've never worked before, and you're expecting this person is kind of like the gatekeeper, or this person is the one who's going to give you advice, and even they don't know how you're going to get a shot at any of this, or they can't give you any kind of strategy, then it's really easy to internalize that, holy shit, this is an uphill battle, and what the hell am I walking into? I'll give you a perfect example. One of those career advice people, when I asked, how should I be finding work? And she actually said to me, well, you need to print your resume and just go walking door to door to different shops and handing in your resume. And I'm in a situation where I can't just go wandering. I need training to find a specific place that I've never been to before. I can't just go walking down Main Street and handing in my resumes to different places, or I can't just drive to the city and hand in my resume to different buildings and stuff like that. And there was just no concept. So it was very easy for me to think, oh my God, this is just going to be a nightmare. What I did end up trying to do was to find graduate positions, because graduate positions usually end up being positions where the companies or institutions understand you don't really have the practical experience, and they're willing to take you on. Especially they realize you're coming out of university and there's a bit more understanding, whereas most places aren't willing to train you. They want you already trained, and they don't want to be the person who has to do that. So with this graduate position, it was with the state. It was in a public service role, and that was something I was interested in, so it kind of fit well. And I applied, and in some industries, they have what's called equal opportunity employment. So especially when it comes to government and non-profit and stuff like that, they make a point of saying, we welcome all people from all diverse backgrounds, disabilities, genders, yada, yada, yada. So in my mind, okay, that's a big tick in my favor. I thought, well, I'm going to be dealing with somebody who is a bit more open. So anyway, I started the application process, and what happens is some of the application processes online are accessible and some of them aren't, or they're accessible to a point, and then you get to a point where it's no longer accessible. So what happened with this was I applied and I got past a couple of rounds, and then I got to this point where I had to look at stuff on the screen, and I think it's called a psychometric test, and it's supposed to tell them something about your personality. And I basically just had to email the company doing the application saying, I'm blind, I can't do this. And they said, no problem, we'll pass you on to the next round. And so I didn't hear anything more. And then a week later, without hearing anything more or without going through any other step, I just got a application thing saying, you've been unsuccessful. Now, in that kind of situation, look, maybe I just was unsuccessful. But on the other hand, you can't help but thinking something's broken down in this process, because how the hell does that make sense? Especially when it's coming from somebody who's claiming to be an equal opportunity employer. And you think, well, if this is the government and this isn't even right, then what hope do you have in a private business where the government really doesn't get to tell them what to do? And private businesses work based on cost more than anything else. So if the government can't even get this right, what hope do I have? So anyway, after a bit of kind of bouncing around with some of this, I managed to get some applications to some other places and get actually some interviews. So this kind of brings me on to my next point, and it's basically to disclose or not to disclose. So when you're going through the application process, there's this tricky thing you need to navigate where you go, do I tell this person that I have a disability? Because if I tell them, I'm being honest, which is one good thing. But if I tell them, it also gives them a chance to dismiss me before they've even met me, or I've even had a chance to explain myself. And it's one of those subtle kind of discriminatory things. And it doesn't just happen with disabilities. It happens with lots of people. You know, there's been quite a number of things where somebody has a foreign name and the person looking at the resumes or the applications says, nah, too hard, don't like it, that's out. And that's before the person even gets to say anything or show what they can do or whatever. Same with women maybe who have children, or just women in general. And it's just put in that, nah, too hard basket, I'll just keep going until I find something I like. And while, you know, everybody gets that, that's part of the workplace, it's that thing where that's actually somebody's life. And if there's a trend out there of people going, no, too hard, then what you're inevitably, you know, making happen is that lots of people end up being out of the workforce even though they're trying. So anyway, that's an aside. I'll come back to that later. But what happens is you decide, do I disclose? And I would try disclosing and I would try not disclosing. So sometimes I would say in my cover letter or my applications that, you know, I've got a vision impairment, but I finished high school, I did my HSC, I went to TAFE, got my diploma, went to university, got my undergraduate degree, bachelor's. And in my mind, I was like, well, look, I'm showing to you that there's obviously a way. Yes, there might be a different way around some things, but I'm clearly capable of something. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do all of this. And especially like in school and in TAFE and university, I kind of end up being, in my institutions anyway, the first person. So I was like the guinea pig. So in my mind, I was like, well, surely that counts for something. But anyway, it comes to that thing of like, okay, yeah, do I disclose? And so sometimes I wouldn't disclose and I'd get to the interview and then I would say, you know, just being upfront with you, this is the story. And then the tone of the interview would change and it would be, oh, okay, yep, oh, cool. Yep, no problem. So, okay. And then, you know, you'd finish up, but the rhythm would clearly break of the interview. And then a few days later, you'd hear you've been unsuccessful. And again, some of that might just be I was the wrong person. But other times it was definitely things were going well and then things changed. And it's not like the good old days where somebody used to be able to say, hey, you're blind, I don't want you. I mean, nobody wants to hear that. But now people realize they have to be subtle about it because they'll get in trouble. But unfortunately, what it means is it's very hard to prove that that's what happened because it's so subtle. Now, let's just assume you do get the interview. You also have to think about, where is the place? Do I know how to get there? Do I need training in order to get there? In most cases, you will. But if your interview is within a couple of days of you finding out, you don't really have the option of getting somebody to show you how to get there on your own. So you either have the trouble of having somebody bring you and then you don't look independent, which can end up being a tick against you, or you get a taxi, which is fine, and then you just sort of fumble your way in and hope for the best. But again, all of these things to somebody who doesn't know any better can look like, how the hell is this going to work? From an employer's point of view, you can think, this person had to get dropped off here. This person is like fumbling around. And if they don't know any better, they can just think that like that in and of itself is evidence that it's a bad idea. But unfortunately, what it means is that people don't understand, you can get training on how to get to work so that it's not a problem. But it's just that this is the first time I've been here. Or I can learn how to get around the workplace safely, but this is my first time I've been here. But to somebody who doesn't know any better, all of that stuff just seems like this is too hard. And that can be enough to go, I'll go with somebody easier. And that's what I meant at the start by saying it's about who you come up against and what they know. Because that can be the entire difference between you getting a job or getting a chance and you not getting a chance. So it's almost like it doesn't matter your qualifications. It doesn't matter your personality. It doesn't matter your ability or your drive or your intelligence. It's, what does this person in front of me know, and are they willing to give me a shot? And I know this isn't just the case for somebody with a disability. It's a larger issue within the workforce because society's just moved in that direction. But these things, like if you're coming up against what another person should know, then that's where trouble starts, because a lot of people don't know stuff unless they have to. And that could make the difference between somebody being long-term unemployed and locked out of the job market for years. Anyway, I eventually got my shot. I saw a graduate position for a blindness organization, and I didn't want to work at a blindness organization because I didn't want to be in that box. People had said to me, well, why don't you just work there? They'll have you. And in my mind, that's not the point. Like, why is it my friends could go and strive for their dreams and try to get into industries they like, and whereas my thing was, well, they'll have you. And it's like, well, that's not really the point, is it? So anyway, I got my shot, and thankfully it worked out really well, and I was able to use what I'd learned at university to do my job. So basically what my job was that I was building surveys, and I was doing speaking to people online, so it was like called stakeholder engagement, and I was doing focus groups and analysis and data and client interaction, and I really, really liked it. It allowed me to use my research skills that I'd learned at university and all this kind of stuff. And because I was in a blindness organization, I didn't have the added weight of, oh my God, I'm blind, I must stick out like a sore thumb, because there were lots of people there who are blind or vision impaired, and it has that setup. And it really allowed me to get that confidence and training under my feet to get going. And I had good people around me, and I realized what I was capable of. And unfortunately, now I'm coming to the end of that job, which I've been in for almost 4 years. And I'm in this situation where I want to move on, and I want to try my hand in the wider world. I don't want to just be bouncing around blindness organizations for the rest of my career. Some people do that, and that's their prerogative, but oftentimes I think it's because of how hard it is elsewhere. So for me, I want to try my hand at the wider world, but that means I'm going to be coming up against narrower minds, if you like, and just less knowledge. And all of that also is added to by the fact that we're in a pandemic and unemployment rates are sky high. So in a normal situation, it's hard to get a job if you have a disability. It's even harder when there's dozens or hundreds of more people in front of you in that line now. So it's going to be interesting, but that just is what it is. The thing that I did find out though when I got my job, which was something that I was never told of before, is that Australia has something called the Job Access Program. And the Job Access Program basically means that there is an organization that will help you obtain any software or hardware or anything like that that you need for the workplace, so that the workplace itself isn't out of cost. Because, as I said before, businesses look at business as a cost. The staff are a cost. The technology is a cost, and they want payoff. So this government organization basically would say, okay, Connor needs screen reading software, or Connor needs headphones so he can use the phone, or he needs a special kind of desk phone that talks to him, or something like that. And that will be funded so that the workplace doesn't have to bear the cost. And then I would just bring that technology to my next job. So it's paid for once, it doesn't need to be paid for again, and no one is kind of bearing the brunt of that cost to kind of end up as a barrier to the employment. Okay, so I'm going to take kind of a different turn here and talk about the other side of looking for work, which I also did when I was coming out of university, and that's job agencies. Because a lot of people would say, well, why don't you use a job agency? No, I did. I went through 3 different job agencies, and these are job agencies that advertise themselves as being able to assist people with disabilities or long-term unemployment or Indigenous people to get employment. So basically just groups that are constantly locked out of the jobs market that find it hard to get back in. So I went to 3 of these different companies, and it was just a travesty. So what basically happened at 3 of these places was that there was a high turnover of staff. So your caseworkers would change every couple of weeks or every couple of months. So you had brand new people to explain your situation to. Most of them had a very poor understanding of what it is the people in front of them could even do. So I would walk in and somebody would say, what can you do? Or how do you use a computer? Or how could you use a computer? And the same again as that career advice person at university. You're thinking, you work in a job agency that helps people with disabilities find work, and even you don't know how I can do a job. So that says a lot to you about what the hell is this place. You advertise yourself as one thing and you're clearly not. What would also happen is that a lot of these places ended up being that the incentives they had were more to keep people on the books rather than to find them work. So there was a big story done about it by the ABC here in Australia. And basically what happens was every person that's on the books, they'd get some kind of government funding. So it ended up being more advantageous for them to keep people on the books rather than find them work. And I just cracked the shit at this because I was like, look, I'm not here to be a number. I'm not here to pick up a pension or whatever. I'm trying to get work. I've been told you can help me find work. I'm not here to fuck around. And that's basically what was happening. Every 2 weeks, I'd get a taxi. I'd spend $40 to go down. I'd walk in for 5 minutes. They would say, hey, have you found work? I'd say no. I'd say, okay, keep trying. Sign this. we'll see you in 2 weeks. By the way, if you don't come in 2 weeks, you know, you might get a call from somebody. Or, well, if you come in 2 weeks, you'll get a $50 iTunes card. And in my mind, I was like, who gives a shit? I'm not here for an iTunes card. I'm here to get a job. And what would happen was they weren't helping me find work. They were just kind of helping me try to work out how I could find myself work. Or every now and then they would go around to companies and like basically beg them to take somebody on. So it's not like a commercial job agency where an employer comes and says, who do you have on the books? Send me their resumes, organize an interview. These places go around to companies and say, I have a kid who's disabled. Could you please give them a go? And it's a completely different setup. And I actually found out from somebody who I won't mention, who is an employer who had somebody approach them from one of these job agencies. And he is a pretty open-minded guy. And even he said, I wouldn't take on somebody who comes from one of these job agencies because I think the incentives are all wrong. So if even an employer who's open-minded thinks that when it comes to interacting with these job agencies, it kind of makes you think like something is broken here, you know? So anyway, to finish up, all of this basically comes down to we live in a society where you need money. You need money to live. You need money to have some kind of security. And I know lots of people who aren't just disabled are in the same situation, you know, especially now. It's a really messed up time. But, you know, you have people who end up being in relationships who have disabilities. They're in relationships with people who are able-bodied, and because they don't have a job, they're financially dependent on the person they are in a relationship with. And lots of people are in relationships with people who are abusers, but they actually don't have the money to be able to leave because they aren't financially secure, because they can't get a job. And all of these things kind of knock on, and it's just your self-worth. You know, like I was 8 months unemployed between university and when I finally got the job at the blindness organization. And even then I understood how people became long-term unemployed, because basically society is telling you you're not useful, you're not valuable, we don't want you. And no matter how much we tell you these are the right paths to find work, it's not working. And it's very easy to think, well, fuck you all, I'm going to go and do my own thing. Like, I never understood how people could be long-term, generationally unemployed until I went through that and thought, if your community is telling you you aren't valuable to them, then why wouldn't you go, you know what? Screw you. I am going to stay at home. I'm going to live my own life. I can so easily see how those kinds of things happen. But that's the other side of it. You have people that go, well, you're not working, must be because you don't want to, or must be because it's easier to stay on the dole or whatever. And you're like, I am trying my hardest, but I'm running into a minefield or a brick wall. And at what point is it self-preservation to stop running into a minefield or stop running into a brick wall? You're trying your hardest, and then you kind of get hit with this shit because somebody watched something on 60 Minutes about some next door neighbors who are bludgers. So therefore everybody who's on a pension or who's unemployed must be in the same basket. And it's just adding more shite to an already crap situation, frankly. At the end of the day, most people want to work. Most disabled people want to work. And that's basically what it comes down to. And in my own opinion, the two biggest things that will help with people with disability to be more included in society and to feel better about themselves and to be able to give back to the society is better schooling and more integrated schooling and more integrated workplace. Because at the end of the day, that makes us just like everybody else. And then people will actually be able to see firsthand what it is we can do and realize that it's not more trouble than it's worth. And then we can actually start taking home our own money, buying our own houses, spending money in the community, and just being like everybody else. So anyway, probably got a bit passionate, but it's close to my heart, and I'm going through it within the next few months again myself. So that should be amazing. But anyway, so I hope that was interesting. I'm glad. Thanks for listening. You can always get in touch with the show by emailing blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. You can tweet me at blindsyepod, and you can find the show on Facebook if you search for Blindseye Podcast. And I will speak to you next week. Cheers.